Hello everyone, and welcome back to Brief Histories. Today we will cover one of the most notorious cases involving mass hysteria in colonial America, one which almost devastated an entire town, the Salem witch trials. To begin to understand the events of the Salem witch trials, it is important to understand the times in which the accusations occurred. In 17th century Massachusetts, life in Salem village was tough. A smallpox pandemic mixed with constant threat of attack by indigenous tribes, factions amongst the town, and a feud with the nearby Salem town made it a fertile ground for fear and suspicion. Not to mention the religious strictness of being a Puritan in the 17th century. Squabbles over property between their two leading families, the Porters, who had strong connections with Salem town's wealthy merchants, and the Putnams, who sought greater autonomy for the village, were all too common. Soon, more than 150 men and women from Salem and the surrounding towns will fill their prisons, and 19 will be executed for the practice of witchcraft. In 1689, through the influence of the Putnams, Samuel Parris became the pastor of the village's church. He brought along to Salem village his wife, their 3 children, a niece and 2 slaves, a man named John Indian, and a woman who is only known as Tituba. There is uncertainty regarding the slaves' ethnic origin, with some historians believing that they were from African heritage, while others believe that they may have been from the Caribbean. Parris had negotiated his contract with the villagers, but after a short stay at Salem village, he sought greater compensation. This and his orthodox Puritan preachings divided the congregation into pro- and anti-Parris factions. In January of 1692, Parris's daughter, Betty, age 9, and niece Abigail Williams, age 11, started having what would be described as a series of fits. Some believed that it started as a fever. Then they began to have episodes where they scream, threw things, and utter peculiar sounds while positioning their bodies in strange positions. Confused by these acts, Parris sought the help of the local doctor, William Griggs, who was unable to account for their behavior medically, put the blame on the supernatural, claiming that the girls had been bewitched. A few weeks later, Ann Putnam Jr., a friend of Betty and Abigail, began to experience similar episodes. Some historians say that the girls had ventured into fortune-telling, stimulated by voodoo tales told to them by Tituba, and in late February, the girls blamed 3 women for afflicting them. Tituba, Sarah Good, who was a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, a poor elderly woman who was an outcast for having a romantic involvement with a slave, bringing the beginning to the trials. All 3 women will be brought up before the local court and questioned for several days, starting in March 1692. Both Good and Osborne claimed their innocence. Tituba originally also pleaded her innocence, but after being questioned for several days and fearful because of her vulnerable state as a slave, she confessed to what the court wanted to hear. In vivid testimony, she claimed that she had been visited by the devil and she had made a deal with him. She described encounters with animals related to witchcraft and a tall man with white hair who had called upon her to sign the devil's book, in which she saw the names of Good and Osborne, along with others who she could not read. She also claimed that there were several other witches looking to destroy the Puritans. With the seeds of hysteria being planted, a stream of accusations would follow over the next few months. On May 27, 1692, after weeks of informal hearings and imprisonments, the governor of Massachusetts, Sir William Phips, ordered the establishment of an official court of oyer and terminer, a court to hear and to decide in Salem town. The accused were forced to defend themselves without aid of counsel, and most damning to them was the admission of a spectral evidence, which was claims by the victims that they had seen and been attacked by specters of the accused. In other words, the accusers would testify that they had been bewitched by the accused through supernatural means. Even as the accused testified on the stand, the girls who had accused them would behave erratically, seemingly to prove the specter's demonic presence. Those who confessed, or who confessed and named other witches, were spared, owing to the court's Puritan belief that they would receive punishment from God. Those who insisted on their innocence met harsher fates. Something noteworthy is that those who the accusers began identifying as witches were no longer just outcast members, but upstanding members of society. As weeks passed, many of the accused would prove to be enemies of the Putnams, and the Putnam family would end up having accusers in dozens of cases. On June 2, 1692, Bridget Bishop, who had been accused of witchcraft but had been found innocent a decade prior, was the first of the defendants to be convicted and hanged at what would later become Gallows Hill in Salem Village. On July 19th, 5 more convicted persons were hanged, to include Sarah Good, who is said to have responded to her conviction quoting, "I am no more of a witch than the judge is a wizard." As the trials progressed, more and more notable people were accused and convicted, one of them being George Burroughs, who had actually served as a minister in Salem Village for a few years. On August 19th, as he stood on the gallows, he recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something no witch was thought capable of doing, raising doubts about his guilt for some in attendance. Nonetheless, their protests were refuted and Burroughs was hanged. Giles Corey, upon being accused and refusing to enter a plea, was subjected to strong and hard punishment, pressed beneath heavy stones for 2 days until he died. It is worth noting that contrary to popular belief, none of the accused were burned at the stake. As the trials progressed, accusations spread to individuals from other communities. An influential minister, who was also the president of Harvard, condemned the use of spectral evidence and instead favored a more direct accusations. He stated that it was better for 10 suspected witches to escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. Then on October 29th, the accusations of witchcraft extended to Governor Phipps's wife. He then ordered the Court of Oyer and Terminer to halt all proceedings, establishing a superior court, which was instructed to not admit spectral evidence. 56 persons proceeded to be indicted under the superior court, and only 3 were convicted. They, along with everyone held in custody, were pardoned by Phipps in May of 1693, thus bringing an end to the trials. In the end, 19 people had been hanged, and another 5, not including Giles Corey, had died in custody. In the years to follow, there would be individual and institutional acts of repentance by many involved in the trials. In 1697, Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, publicly acknowledged his own errors and guilt in the proceedings. In 1702, the General Court declared that the trials had been unlawful, and a few years later, Ann Putnam Jr. apologized for her role as an accuser. 22 of the 33 convicted were exonerated by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which also paid restitution to the families in 1711. In 1957, the state of Massachusetts formally apologized for the trials, and finally, in 2001, the last of the 11 convicted were fully exonerated. So there you have it, a brief summary of the Salem witch trials. What's your take on the events that unfolded during that period? Were there actual witches running free to destroy the way of life in Salem Village? Or was this just an elaborate plot to remove unwanted members of society for the benefit of those in power? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to follow here for more history.